Carmen Sandiego's Great Chase Through Time is a 1997 edutainment point-and-click adventure game developed by Brøderbund Software for Windows and Mac devices. It is a rebooted version of the 1989 time travel title wherein Time Is Carmen Sandiego, making it the second time video game in the Carmen Sandiego franchise. It was strongly influenced by the short-lived PBS game show of the same name, which in turn is a spin-off to the long-running successful game show Wherein the World Is Carmen Sandiego. Time was published by Brøderbund, which previewed the game at the 1997 Toy Fair in New York City. After Brøderbund was sold to the Learning Company, the game was re-released with a minimal redesign, which included being renamed to its current title. The game's narrative involves master thief Carmen Sandiego, who has used a time machine called the Chronoskimmer to plant her associates at key historical events, aiming to influence history by stopping these events from occurring. The objective of the game is to track down Carmen Sandiego and her henchmen by jumping through time tunnels that link historical periods together, and correct the course of history. The player visits well-known historical events, such as the signing of the Declaration of Independence and Lewis and Clark's expedition to the Pacific Northwest, and meets historical figures including Queen Hatshepsut, William the Conqueror, and Yuri Gagarin. In each segment, or case, the player must interact with the culture and solve historical puzzles to catch Carmen's villains and retrieve the stolen item. At the end of Case 18, the player locates the Chronoskimmer, thereby acquiring the tools to chase and capture Carmen for the final case. Carmen Sandiego's Great Chase Through Time received critical acclaim upon release, with praise particularly directed to its story, soundtrack, puzzle solving and historical content. It was awarded Computer Edutainment Game of the Year in the 1998 DICE Awards. Gameplay. The game is a point-and-click adventure with a changeable cursor, drop-down menus and on-screen icons. Players must identify on-screen hotspots in order to find items that will help their progress. In each case, the player must investigate clues to help a historical figure solve a problem, recover a stolen treasure, and capture a thief. The good guides are available to help the player to complete each challenge. The player also has access to the Acme Agent Handbook supplied with the game, which contains hints and suggestions for solving the puzzles. Each case involves a four-step process of identifying the theft, solving the problem, collecting the Carmen notes and arresting the thief. When the player arrives in the new location at the start of each case, the accompanying good guide will provide some historical context and mention any notable figures who will appear throughout the case. After clicking on a person, the player can proceed to interrogate them about their situation. If necessary, they may then re-ask any questions via rollover text to extract further information. Historical characters' responses guide the player toward that period's task. For example, Queen Elizabeth will refer to the unfinished Globe Theatre every time the player interacts with her, and the only dialogue option that progresses the case involves she offering to help rebuild it. It is later revealed that the player must memorize lines of verse from Shakespeare's plays, and then match stanzas from the banners on wall pieces with banners plastered across the holes in the unfinished wall. In the context of this level, Burbage keeps making excuses to avoid carrying the wall pieces and fitting them into the wall, leaving the player to do it instead. Items must be collected and moved around the screen or placed in the inventory box to complete cases. Characters will either offer the player objects, or the player must seek out items that can be taken. Collectible items can be kept for later use by dragging the object into the inventory box. Players must also look for scraps of the Carmen notes, which describe where each thief will hide. These notes have each been torn into 3 pieces to make them more difficult to find. The player must click on the scraps of paper to assemble them into a whole note. Once all the pieces of the Carmen note are found, The Acme handcuffs activate and the player can decode Carmen's message to deduce her henchman's location. Using the time cuffs on the relevant object reveals the thief, which the good guide then arrests. After twice capturing each crook, the player pursues Carmen herself. The player can access the Chronopedia, a historical guide that provides information about each time period and its important people, places, maps and events. Each good guide carries a section of the Chronopedia, and gives the player the relevant chapter upon arrival in each time period. All the text within the Chronopedia was reviewed and approved by Encyclopedia Britannica. The information may be used to decipher Carmen's notes. The gameplay mechanics change once the player retrieves the chronoskimmer at the end of Case 18, which sees Carmen relinquishing her stolen item to the player, instead of staying within the same time period for the duration of the final case. The player now follows clues at each location to work out where to go next. This is a return to the 1989 version of time mechanic, though the player now has the ability to travel to any period in history whenever they like. Carmen may only travel to time periods that she has already visited, and therefore the game restricts the player to the time periods of the previous cases. Parts of the screen previously occupied by Carmen's notes and in-game collectible items are replaced with the chronoskimmer slider and the travel button. Throughout this case, the player receives help from all 5 Acme good guides. Originally, players could visit a themed website for more in-depth learning about the cultures visited in the game, which included articles from Britannica, hints, and a feedback area. The site, along with the other Carmen Sandiego pages created by Brøderbund Software and maintained by the Learning Company, were shut down in 2005. Plot. On the opening screen, the player can choose to sign into the Acme roster to begin a game, or continue with a saved one, or create a customized game by selecting one or more cases. The game's opening credits finds Carmen breaking into Acme TimeNet headquarters in San Francisco, where she unlocks and steals a device called the Acme Chronoskimmer. Carmen later explains to her henchmen that the Chronoskimmer allows them to travel through time and steal historical treasures, thereby altering the course of history. Each crook must travel to a different time and place to steal an object, and Carmen gives them a note to tell them where to hide before she will pick them up. Meanwhile, the chief greets the player and explains what was stolen, why it is important, and what will happen if Carmen and her henchmen succeeds. The chief explains to the player that she can immediately stop Carmen by going through time tunnels, which are passages through time and space left behind the chronoskimmer whenever it jumps through time. After the player enters the time tunnel, that is the only way she can communicate with the chief. Once the player have entered her cases, she cannot communicate with the chief as she has not yet been born before 1948. However, the chief sends the player one of the 5 good guides, characters who are knowledgeable of the culture of each case's historical period, to help the player if she gets stuck, as well as liaison with the historical figures. Each guide has a particular area of historical expertise, such as antiquities, exploration or inventions. The 5 good guides are Antiquity, I've an Idea, Rock Solid, Renaissance, and Politics. Each offers assistance when the player clicks on them and asks questions presented at the bottom of the screen. The game is divided into 19 chapters, or cases, starting in ancient Egypt and each advancing the player closer to the modern day. The player must complete all cases to win the game. At the end of each case, the player and the good guide return to the time tunnel, where the chief tells the player how they have set history back on track and briefs the player for the next case. The player begins the game with the rank of Time Pilot, but is promoted by the chief as the game progresses, advancing to Time Scout, Time Trooper, Time Detective, Time Inspector, and by the end of the game, the player achieves the rank of Time Sleuth and has a chance to capture Carmen. Once they are successful, the chief lets them in on top-secret information that Carmen Sandiego was once an Acme agent but felt the challenge of catching crooks was too easy, so became a villain herself to outsmart her former colleagues. She aimed to delete a detailed dossier about her transition, which is thematically linked to her desire to delete the memory of history's greatest figures and achievements, under the pretense of simply stealing history's greatest treasures. Though unstated in the game, it is implied that she only ordered her henchmen to steal these items as a decoy in order to ensure the Acme headquarters was completely empty while all agents were cleaning up her trail of historical mess. Once the player captures Sandiego, they have completed the game. Characters and cast. The only live-action role in the game was that of the chief, played by Lynn Thigpen. All other roles were performed as voiceovers. Although most of the voice actors in the game only play one character, some performed multiple roles in different cases. For example, Charles Martinet plays both William Shakespeare and Ludwig van Beethoven. Jarian Monroe plays a mixture of both historical and fictional characters. Ivor the Blacksmith, Kublai Khan, Huang the Merchant, Richard Burbage, and Yuri Gagarin. While the voice actors playing Carmen Sandiego and most of her crooks are not credited, Francine Scott is credited as playing villains. The game distinguishes between historical and fictional characters with the rollover text that is displayed when the cursor is placed over a character. With a few exceptions, characters who have both a first and last name are genuine historical figures, while characters with only a first name or a descriptive title are fictional. However, some of the real historical figures like Queen Elizabeth I and Montezuma are referred to by only their first names.